There was just misplacement. And that was the first lesson that I basically learned. And the first lesson that I learned, that one must have an abiding faith in oneself, comes what may be. That's the only way you can secure your life, you can control your body, and you can control your movement. There's no other way, actually, in fact. Much later, as I move, actually, I also tell you that I became the part of the member of the Communist Party during my student days, becoming much more revolutionaries and the other things, participating in the social activities, political activities, the protest movement, and this and that. Almost 10 years gone into that, actually. And that has given me lots of confidence, a confidence to deal with a different kind of situation, with the different kinds of conditions. I would not say that is something a very bad experiences to me. But one thing I have learned by virtue of being part of that particular past is that ideology blinds you. And it blinds you very badly. So whichever the form since then, any kind of, whether it has to do with religion, it has to do with secular, it has to do with any kind, the ideology has inherent kind of tendency to blind you, to basically homogenize you, to basically produce you, and to basically transform you in a very single accommodative kinds of a person, and you don't see other ways. That there are existing the multiple kinds of the perspectives or multiple kinds of opinion. You become much more arrogant and you become much more trying to privilege your own kinds of opinion all the time, and therefore you also lose a faith in a dialogue, actually. And that's where I realize that this is no good for your own development, for society development, and for the nation development. And then probably my trajectory move, actually. I move into the academics very seriously. And one of the most surprising results that basically came out to me, and probably I never thought that I became one of probably the youngest professor in India. I was offered the professorship at the age of 37, 38, which is very, very rare. I did not go through the motion of selection committee, blah, blah, blah. I straight away received the invitation that Mr. Alam come here and join as a professor, precisely because I took my academics and then I moved to abroad. I never thought that I'll move abroad, but then subsequently, because of my academic engagement, I moved many of the places, actually. And wherever this might travel, actually, one thing's become much more sharper and sharper and sharper. And that is that where I have my faith, and I have my belief, and I have this my conviction, which basically says this, that the life is full of opportunities. I'm a very hopeful person. I'm not a hopeless guy. I see in Nigeria otherwise. When I look at my students and the otherwise, they always come to me with lots of complaint. All the time there's a complaint. Complaint against authority, complaints against the state, complaint against situations, complaint against this, complaint against this. And this entire culture of complaining, But somehow I have not bought, because I'm always very hopeful. What is fundamental in our own life is essentially is that one thing that no matter you are hopeful or hopeless, change is fundamental. And all of us participating in that change. You need to be alive to a change. And I do believe is that the world is full of opportunities. And life is full of opportunities. And Nigeria is full of opportunities. And Africa is full of opportunities. I don't see the other way is round, actually. The only thing is that who is, I would not normally use the term failure and success, because these are the two stupid terms for me, actually. I don't believe in this terminology, because somebody is failure in relation to, and somebody is more successful only in relation. It's not in a very absolute category, in fact. But what I would see certainly that somebody has better access to opportunities and resources, and to that extent, they have proven to be relatively, if you want to use the term success, in the eyes of the public, or in the eyes of government, or in the eyes of the regime of the recognition, whatever you wish to say, actually, in fact. And some of them, despite hard work and despite painful journey, has not been relatively so effective in terms of participations in the resources and the opportunities. And I would say that the crucial distinctions that basically brings to that question that why you have not been effective and why somebody has been so far very, very effective is a question that it essentially the question of your cultural capital. It essentially the questions of harnessing of your network actually. And I think that all of us are born with some cultural capital. All of us are born with some cultural capital. The only thing is that, and probably, the recognition of cultural capital is very high in privileged families, in privileged classes, in privileged social groups. And therefore, you will find that they are far more conscious in terms of using their cultural pedagogy, family ties, land ties, city ties, community ties, religious ties, all kind of the networking which are being born by the primordial ties or your professional identities. What it is that those who are basically relatively far more privileged in terms of the educational legitimacy, privilege in terms of the economic development, privilege in terms of the social standing, privilege in terms of access to the state resources actually, they are far more conscious. And they have somehow basically used those networks by virtue of by birth, by virtue of land ties, by virtue of caste, by virtue of community, by virtue of other forms of identity as well as, and therefore you will find them, they have been relatively forging these kinds of the network. They have been relatively far more, I would say, effective in harnessing the opportunity that this world basically provides you. But let me make it very clear that all of us are born with some cultural capital. And one of this cultural capital is essentially the question of the social network, actually, a network. And once I say this network, then probably what is that which can make the network very effective? What is that? And when I look at this question, that what is that which makes the network very effective, is essentially the question of principle of transparency and trust. If there is a one thing which is very much missing in this modern world, is a question of trust. How do you build your trust? And you cannot build your trust unless and until you are not internally or you are not being seen as transparent. And therefore, when I am speaking of the question of the network is not about building your capacity to seek any kind of the favors. It's not about that. It is essentially about that, building your capacity and capability to navigate this diverse world. This diverse world is full of many kinds of the opinions and the many kinds of the values and the many kinds of the identities, without being this question that which one is, superior and which was is inferior. I would not use the term better, certainly, but this entire idea which is superior and which is inferior. An individual or anybody interprets, if you look at, for example, the histories and all, I mean, network has, to be honest with you, it has always been there. It is not a question of the 20th century or 21st century. It has always been there right from the very beginning. Wherever, for example, you migrate, the network comes first. You go with some connections, actually. You go with some network. You go with some addresses. You go with some recommendations, actually. And in an age in which we are living, which is the age of the social media, which is the age of the questions of the background checkup, whosoever would like to appoint you and would like to give you an opportunity, the first question is that background checkup. In any, for example, the Indian job, if you get into the police services or administrative services, you will be subjected to the background checkup. And the background checkup will be from the police stations, from the communities, from the others. It is not something that this is something very new, actually. What is new is a kind of a terminology. And in this globalized world, the development is not possible without very effective network actually, in fact. And therefore, the student communities who are looking for a career actually, all from this platform, I can take this position that one has to be alive to the idea of the network, and therefore the network becomes simultaneously a question of process, a question of values, as a question of means. Thank you very much.